They've sort of wired me up. Can you all hear me? Well, if anybody can't hear me, please speak out so we can correct that. Well, I'd like to first of all just acknowledge that it's a huge pleasure for me to be here to join you in this tradition of every year getting the best sailors together. And it's partly because I had such joy 10 years ago in being here with my own yacht, the Ragosa, where we just got so much pleasure cruising in really many parts of the Baltic, and particularly in Finland. And I've been so pleased yesterday today to renew friendships with many who I met at that time. We took our boat for one time to Kotka for the boat show there, and I just did renew my friendship here with Martin Rosenstedt from Lovisa, who so ably took care of my yacht, rebuilt the cockpit. And so I have a boat with a lot of Finnish craftsmanship in it, which I am so pleased to have. And I heard some more about this event from my good friend Dave Pedrick. He and I both went to the Webb Institute of Naval Architecture, and I understand he was your speaker 2 or 3 years ago, and he was one who told me how pleasant it would be to be here. I'm going to, in my presentation, follow the theme of 120 years of classic boats. And you know, in thinking about that, it was quite curious to me how the period of 120 years is not only significant here in Finland, but is also particularly significant in the United States, particularly regarding my own family, who was very active in the design and construction of the yachts. And I'm going to tell you quite a lot about that because I think it so much parallels what happened here. And the thing that I find curious about that is that one would think 120 years ago, when there was no mass communication, that we would all be going in different directions, compared to today, when an accident with a catamaran in San Francisco was immediate news in Helsinki. And I think it's fair to say that the rate of evolution of yachts today is much more of a steep curve because of the communication that everybody knows what everybody's doing, so to speak, except for the secrets that are kept, and the secrets only seem to be kept until the race is over, and then the architects like to tell how smart they were, so we hear about it. What I think I'd like to do is just mention a little bit about the fundamentals and a quick summary of how things developed. And then I have quite a number of illustrations to show you of the early yachts, particularly the fin keel boats that evolved at the beginning of this 120-year period in the 1890s, both here and in America. And I want to show you a little bit about how the Herreshoffs built boats and feature some of the America's Cup accomplishments and the boats that were there. I just obtained something very unusual to have. Perhaps you know that moving pictures were invented in the United States by the famous Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. He refined the telephone after another one invented it. And in the mid-1890s, he invented moving pictures. And to my astonishment lately, I discovered that he came to New York to photograph some of my grandfather's America's Cup yachts in as early as 1899. So we have a couple of short films of that, which I think you'll enjoy seeing, because it's the only films in existence that show those great big America's Cup yachts, the way they sailed around. I have a friend, Dennis Connor, who I've sailed a lot with in the America's Cup, and he sort of feels he's the inventor of match racing techniques. Not so, because in these films from Thomas Edison, nearly 120 years ago, you could see the match race tactics at the start when they were all weaving around with each other. So perhaps the moral of that is that nothing new, that things have happened in the past. And I experience that frequently. We design boats, and once in a while we think we've come up with something rather clever. And then we look back and find out my grandfather did it 100 years ago, which is both satisfying and a bit disappointing. But anyway, that's the case of what it is. Well, now, all of us here are sailors, and we relate to the evolution of fast yachts. And I think it's worthwhile, before getting into my pictures, to reflect a little bit about what makes it all work. We've seen the fact that in those early years, 120 years ago, the yachts were very different. They were heavier, they pretty much were plumb stems, they had long underbodies with a lot of wetted surface, and the hull forms were quite different, usually more blunt in the bow and more streamlined in the stern. And so, how did things progress, and what are the important factors? Well, of course, the important factors are the length of the boat, because a long boat can be driven fast within the waves that it generates. The weight is very important, because the thing that holds it back, of course, is the bulk of the boat, the mass of it. A big fat boat is very difficult to drive fast. And of course, what we've seen during the 120-year period is an incredible modification to the rigs and sail plans. The gentleman here in the first row who makes your sails, makes sails today that are so different from what they were in the 1890s. And part of that, I think, has been the lessons of aeronautics from when airplanes were invented in 1903. We know now to make the rigs tall, don't need much cord to the sails, and of course for windward, that's a very great factor. No matter what we do, though, there's still the immutable physics of the wind and sea. And you know, there's an immutable fact that any wave, whether it's generated by the winds or by the disturbance of a hull going through the water, any wave has a very particular relationship between its length and its speed. The speed of a wave is directly proportional to the square root of the length of its distance from crest to crest. And that fact is really what limits, to a practical extent, the speed of a boat, at least a heavy boat. Because unless you're planing, once you attain a speed that is the same as the wave that is equivalent to the wave you generate, such that the hull fills the entire void between crests, you're sort of trying to drive that hull uphill on the front of the wave, and it makes it very difficult to do. And that's why, if you plot the curve of resistance of the hull, it's pretty flat in the beginning, and then you get steeper and steeper, and then very steep. And of course, these marvelous boats now that sail in the Volvo around the world go beyond that. But it's only because they're very light, and they have big rigs, and they have kind of crazy sailors making them go as fast as they dare, no matter what the conditions. And so I think the lesson in reflecting on that is that it is the materials that have made such a difference in this 120 years of evolution. In my grandfather's days, starting off around that time, the hulls were pretty heavy, mostly wood. He was one of the people who, with his good education and practicality in engineering, modified the scantlings to make boats lighter, and that was an early step in making boats go better because they got lighter. And of course, we progressed from wood to metal to fiberglass to these incredible composites today, sandwiches, which are very light. And it is the lightening of the boats that has, more than anything, led to, perhaps over 120 years, to simplify things, a doubling of the speed. And the same thing with the sail plan. When I first used to race, as I did many times in the America's Cup, we felt very lucky to get a very fine new jib. And there was no way, once you had a good sail, to reproduce it, because it was kind of lucky to have a good sail. So we would try one of them out, and if it was a superb sail, we wouldn't use it again until an important race. Whereas today, with the computer design of the sails, and with the materials and the fine techniques, the sail makers can duplicate a sail exactly, and that's why we are so able to get a good sail in the wind design classes like you all feature so much in your meter boats here. And I think so it's fair to say that the two things that have been the most important have been the design, engineering, and materials to make hulls lighter, plus the incredible advances in sail design and sail making. So I want to show you some boats that are examples of that, and I would like to first of all make mention of one other factor, of course, and that's the wooded surface. And early on, the boats had tremendous surface, and by reducing that, we were able to cut down the drag of the boats by at least 30%, and that's been a huge factor in making it better. And of course, that was an early element of your meter boats here, that they got the keels shorter and shorter. The other aspect, which is of great importance, is the rating rules. And my colleague here, Tapio Sylvanen, is going to tell you a lot more about the details of rating rules and their great impact upon the racing both here and in America. But I'd like to say that, first of all, I don't know much about your Valeur rule except what Tapio has told me about. But in America, we used to have a length and beam rule, a very simple one. The most curious thing is in England, they had a rating rule which evolved from something totally unrelated. And perhaps many of you know this, but in the Thames River, in the early commerce, before our 120-year period, in the mid-1800s, they had a tax on cargo ships that came up the Thames into London. And the tax was on the formula which involved the beam of the vessel squared. So naturally what happened was they took these nice proportioned ships and they made them narrower and narrower and narrower, because if you cut the beam in half, you'd cut the square of the beam into 1/4 and you didn't have to pay much tax. To me, one of the most weird things is that practice of the narrow deep hulls then was passed on to the early British yachts. And I think it's one of the reasons that America had such success winning the America's Cup in those early years, that we were able to race sort of moderate proportion boats against these boats, plank on edge boats of England, which were very narrow and very deep and had a great deal of wetted surface and limited stability. I only mention that because I think it is a terrific example of the strong impact of rating rules upon the design of boats. It's just sort of a good preamble of what Tapio is going to go into when he mentioned it to you. Right after 1900, my grandfather was asked, my grandfather Nathaniel Green Herreshoff, who was the naval architect who did so much in America, he was asked by the New York Yacht Club to invent a new rating rule. And that rule was initially called the Herreshoff rule. The merit of the rule was that it was based on fundamentals. It was a very simple formula. The rating was an arbitrary factor multiplied by the length of the boat, which is very important because long length whips in the waves, the length times the square root of the sail area, and obviously the size of the sail area is a very important factor because that's the engine of the yacht, divided by the cube root of displacement, which is the factor that holds you back. So in other words, the numerator is what gives you speed, and the denominator underneath is what slows you down. And he used these different powers in order that he would end up with a linear measurement of just length, because you take length, which is linear, times the square of the sail area, which is also linear. You have dimension squared, divided by the displacement, which is the cube root of that is a linear measurement. You divide the linear measurement into the squared measurement, you have a length. So the universal rule, length times the square of the sail area divided by the cube root of displacement, factored to be a reasonable size, is really the length of the yacht. And that's what's used in the rating rule. The other thing he did, in order to prevent extremes of overhang, was to devise a new method of measuring length. which instead of being the length on centerline of the waterline, which is usually used, it was a length on what he called the quarter beam length. It was a length half of the way from the middle of the boat to the widest point. And that, perhaps more than anything, controlled the dimensions of boats. And this universal rule was used for extensively for about 50 years, and it was used in the America's Cup for the J boats racing in the 1930s. And of course, around that same time, the international rule was developed, which is the one you're so familiar with here, with your 6 meters, 8 meters, and I guess you've got a 12-meter being restored now to be a great boat next year. And those are the boats that I sail people out in, the 12 meters in the America's Cup. So before I begin the presentation of the slides, I'd like to say that at the end of my time, we're going to have a little question and answer period. And I would welcome any questions you have, whatever time is allotted to it. And just a little more about the Herreshoffs. My grandfather was born in 1848. So he was at the prime of his professional career at the beginning of our 120-year period in 1893, when he was 45 years old. And he and his brother, he had an older brother, J.B. Herreshoff, who was a gentleman who was totally blind. But the blind man ran the company, dealt with all the clients, hired the workmen, and was very much in charge. So that my grandfather, who was the engineer and the architect, and the person who directed the constructions, was free to concentrate wholly on what was his profession. They started out building mostly powered craft, in particular naval torpedo boats. They produced those for the United States Navy, for the Navy of England, and even exported quite a number of them to Russia way back in those days. I know Russia's a kind of bad words mentioned in Finland, but they did do business with the Russians. And then in 1891, he designed a yacht named Gloriana. And many people, professionals in the business, regard the Gloriana as the forerunner of the modern yacht, at least in the United States. The Gloriana was about the size of a 12-meter boat, but instead of having the plumb bow and long, high-weathered surface, he cut away the profile. It had a short keel. He did not have a separate rudder, but he had the rudder right on the back of the short keel. And he used new methods of construction, to which I alluded to a moment ago, which in that boat made a big jump ahead in reducing the weight of the boat. He also had a taller rig, still gaff rig, because the Marconi rig didn't come in until 27 years later. But it was a tall gaff rig and very fine sails. And that boat was built for what was to be a new competitive class of the New York Yacht Club. They called it the 46-foot class, which meant 46 feet on the waterline length. And they had 8 races that year amongst boats designed by all the prominent designers of America. And the thing that went wrong was that the Gloriana won every race, which did 2 things. It destroyed the class. They never raced that class after that year. And it elevated Nat Herreshoff to be the designer of the America's Cup boats for the next 25 years. And I want to show you pictures of that. But in particular, we're going to start out with these illustrations. I'm going to show you some of the fin keelers that he did. And it's very fascinating to me that during the 1890s, when fin keel boats were being developed in America, they were also being developed here in Scandinavia. And that's what, as I first said, puzzles me, because there wasn't very good communication, and yet we were all doing the same logical thing. So if we could have the lights down, I'd like to show you pictures of some of the things that we've done, particularly in America. And I've got to find my device here for the grip. I guess it's here. Yeah. Okay, so this first picture is of one of Mr. Herreshoff's America's Cup boats, the Vigilant, which defended the America's Cup in 1893. And that was built only 2 years after his breakthrough boat of the Gloriana. Well, I guess this is a line that you help me. Okay. We've got some multiple devices here. This one. Tap you aren't going to mix those up, maybe, but they're the same, so it doesn't really matter. Which one's which?
The one that goes here is not the right one.
Is which one? This one was here.
That's right.
Okay. So this is an early, what we call catboat in the United States. It was designed and built by Nat Herreshoff for his own use. And you can see it's a very wide boat. The beam is about half the length. And yet, I think you can get a sense of the elegance of the lines with a narrow hollow bow and an easy run back. An example of what he could do. And this is a picture of a boat named Shadow, which was a sort of a evolution from the catboat types, which were wide, into the ultimate more moderate yachts with practical lesser beam. Another picture. This Shadow was a boat that raced in Boston for about 30 years, all during the latter part of the 19th century, and won a great many races. And this is an example of a class that he designed later called the New York 30s. And these have been very wonderful boats. They came out in 1905, and they built about 20 of them. Some of them still race. In fact, one of them went to the classic races in Central Pay a few years ago and won a great deal of those races there. That's another picture of the early boats. And this is the best example, probably in existence, of great schooners that were designed and built at the Herreshoff Company. This is a boat named Mariette. I had the pleasure of racing aboard here in a Atlantic race in 1997. And this boat, now owned by a Frenchman, races every year, particularly in the Mediterranean and Monaco, Caen, and Central Pay. He's about 120 feet long. They built a great many of these classic latch straight dinghies, and I noticed that when I was here 10 years ago, we have quite a lot of dinghies in Finland which are rather like those boats. Again, that's a case of probably parallel development without much communication. In fact, I was so astounded a few years ago, before things got so bad, I had a trip on the Amazon River in Egypt. And I was fascinated to observe rowing boats there, which looked so like these dinghies that my grandfather designed. And the point of that is that my grandfather designed them probably pretty quickly from a knowledge of what hulls go through the water easily and his sense of naval architecture. The Egyptians, of course, developed the same thing because they had 1,000 years of one guy copying an easy boat to row. So evolution works as well as naval architecture, but naval architecture is quicker. They also built a great many power boats. This is one designed by my father, Sidney Herreshoff. I'm not going to show you any other power boats, but I just wanted to mention that they built a great many of those kind of boats, and they also, in the early years, designed and built the steam engines. And there's a great example here in the boat show of a boiler and steam engine, which I'm told is going to be put back into a yacht, and that's the kind of thing that they built so many of in those years before gasoline and diesel engines came in. Now this is a very interesting old picture on the pier of the Herreshoff Company. And you can see this boat is a pretty nice boat, easy driven, straight line, not too heavy. And here's the keel coming down, very short, and this is all lead. And curiously, he didn't build a very deep rudder, which probably today we know would be better. But look how wonderful that short keel is and how much ballast there is. Probably the ballast on that boat was well over 50% of the total weight. It was very successful. And these are the kind of boats they built. We have a museum in Bristol, Rhode Island. Some of you have visited it, and I would urge any of others of you, when you get to New York or Boston, do come down to Bristol and visit the Herreshoff Marine Museum. We have about 60 yachts there. We don't have very many fin keelers, but we do have several. And they have these sort of forms. Here's the lead mold. Generally, he used a bronze plate in here. And the rudder was built usually of wood with a either a wood or bronze headstock. And here is a view of some of those boats sailing. You see, he had sort of, in some cases here, these snub bows in order to have straight lines coming back from above the cutwater and on back. So these were very easily driven boats. Here's a picture of, this is the so-called Newport 30 class. We hope to, we don't have one of these boats, but we hope to build a replica of it. And then he'd had a lack of success on one of his boats going to England, and they decided to try to do better in the racing in England. So we built this 75-foot yacht named Niagara. And so this was the biggest of about 50 fin kilos that he built at that time. And again, see the bronze plate, the big bulb here, and not so deep rudder, and very nice, easy lines. That boat was taken to England in the late 1890s and won every race there. And that exonerated him from his previous not such great success. This is a boat named Bambino that I still race a lot. Very modern form, not a fin keeler, but you can see it's a short keel. And we race this in classic races. Our classic races in America are not as well developed as the ones in the Mediterranean, and probably not as well developed as your classic racing here. But it's getting stronger all the time. And the only thing is, we don't have enough boats. Here's another case of what was called the New York 30s, that class from 1905. And here they are in early races in Long Island Sound, probably around 1915. And the same boat today, this one has been beautifully restored. And this is a view of a typical race where we live. We live in a very nice bay in Narragansett Bay. Has some islands, a little bit like your archipelago. And they built a few bridges, but we have really a pretty nice place to sail and race. And this is one of his schooners, built in 1926 and still racing today. It's at the present moment in Antigua, ready to compete in April down there in the classic yacht races. It's about a 75-foot schooner. And there she is racing against a sloop. I think that sloop probably going to outpoint her and pull ahead and be able to cross her bow, but we'll see what happens. And they used to store the boats in the winter. We just had a huge blizzard in Rhode Island. Apparently it snowed more than a half a meter. I came over here with all kinds of new warm underwear, and I find it warmer in Helsinki than it is in Rhode Island. And this was a visit of a wonderful yacht to our location a few years ago. This boat is a replica of a very famous Herreshoff schooner, the Westwood, from 1910. This boat is named Eleonora, and she's a 136-foot schooner. And there's another one being built named Alina, the same thing. And so it's such a great thing that where we don't have enough classic boats, people seem to be beginning to rebuild them, and in many cases faithfully to what was there. This boat raced a good deal in the United States, and here's a picture of some of the great sloops, and here another one of the schooners. They built a lot of schooners in the early 1900s. That went a pretty windy day. Probably they got too much sail on. It's kind of slow when the leeward rail gets in the water, don't you think so? And this is the modern day Alina that I've been privileged to race on quite a bit. It's a great thrill to sail this boat with a crew of 45. And this is the most important guy in the crew. His name is Tricky. And he climbs up these hoops, just like he's on Broadway, and he climbs out on the gaff, and he seems to be perfectly comfortable up there. I don't do that. And that's that same design in the early days, racing in England and right after World War I. We have in our museum a model room. My grandfather's method was pretty unusual. Instead of making a drawing on paper, of the three views of cutaways in a yacht form. He would make some preliminary designs and estimates, and then his method of designing the hull was to personally carve a model. So I have this collection, family collection of 500 yacht models, and when you come sometime, hopefully, to our museum, it'd be my pleasure to show you these models, because to some extent it's fair to observe that they are the evolution of American yachts during the 120-year period that is the same period you're talking about. All kinds of forms, getting better and better as time went on. And we have a unique instrument that he made. He made this instrument in 1876. I still use it. This was a picture taken of me measuring from an old model only a couple of weeks ago. And the machine is on a very accurately flat steel table, and it is this device that slides on a precision track and has linked to it a horizontal arm that goes up to a pointer that can be engaged with the surface of the hull. So once this is all set up, ready to go, it's a simple matter to locate it longitudinally wherever you wish, and in his case, he would set it longitudinally on every location of the frame that's to be built. And then, by manipulating the two arms, sliding them up and down and in and out, you could read from this arm the offset of the distance from the center line to the point on the hull, and read on this gauge the height of that point. And so all we have to do is respectively locate each location, set in a height, measure the offset, list it all in a little book. And then in his day, Captain Nat's day, he didn't make any lines drawing at all. He took the little book to the shop, and a week later they'd have forms all set up to that shape, and the week after they'd get steam bend frames in, and the week after they'd plank the hull, all done in 3 weeks. So we try to replicate some of that today. It's a great pleasure to do so. This is a great picture of the old shop. This was a boat named Illyrian that was built for my grandfather's own use. It's a 28-foot bay sailing boat with a small cuddy. And this is a great old, we don't have any pictures from the shop. This is a great old picture of these fine craftsmen building that boat in 1912, so 101 years ago. And there they are, probably didn't really launch the boat. And by the way, this is a scale. My grandfather was always obsessed with the weights of the boats, and he would even taper the frames, and he'd use very light planking wood, do anything he could to make the boats light. And yet this boat is still in terrific sailing condition 101 years later. This is my own boat, the Ragosa, that I proudly sailed here to Finland 10 years ago. Maybe bring it back sometime. And here she was being built upside down. They built them all upside down, even a 60-foot boat, in 1926. And there's another one, the same design on a further stage. That's the Marilees. And then beyond there is the schooner, one of the schooner pictures I just showed you. And the fascinating thing is these three boats, the Ragosa, Marilee, and the Mary Rose schooner, are all well restored and sailing today, some 87 years later. That's a picture of the framing and the way the frames went in. They could build a boat like this, like the Ragosa, 60 feet long, in 2 months, because they had such good shops and wonderful workmen and materials, and they did the process repetitively. Another view of the shops showing the work on the deck of the boat and sister ship further up. And so the early New York 40s sailing. This says New York 50, which is a matter of confusion. It actually is a New York 40, but there is a class of New York 50s, 50 feet in the waterline. But this boat is the Marilee, which is a sister ship to my boat, and it's been very successful in racing, particularly in the Mediterranean. So what we do when we get ready for the season, we pick a quiet Sunday morning early and we drive our boat right through downtown Bristol and over to the boatyard, and there she is in a nice, quiet sunny morning in the spring, ready to go sailing, which I hope we'll be able to do pretty soon. Yeah. This is a boat belonged to a friend of mine that was resurrected from very bad condition, completely restored, and he's taken the boat to Saint-Tropez and raced and won the series there. But I like to show him this picture because he's a very competitive guy, and he's beaten me a number of times. So I'd like to show him this picture. We just found this, we're framing it up big as into it, because there he is, and here we are. Sometimes it's the other way around. So I wish I was able to tell you the response he'll have when he gets the picture. And that's one of the New York 40s sailing in a lot of wind. And this boat is a sister ship, Rowdy, that has been very, very successful in Saint-Tropez the last few years, being the boat of the year. But I call this the Ragosa Adventure, and that was when we had the intense pleasure of sailing across the ocean, racing in the America's Cup Jubilee in Cowes in 1901, and then coming up here. And I'm going to go through quickly. We were able to win the classic class there. This was at an island as we were approaching Finland, and I can assure you every one of these bottles is empty, but we didn't empty them. Dinner there, and here we are at the yacht club here, and that was another year like this year of 8-meter world championships. We happened to be there at the same time. And 94-year-old Olin Stevens came aboard to visit me, and he was here to see the 8-meter races, and he was very fit at the age of 94. He lived to be over 100. They made me the godfather of this replica yacht built in Loviso, where I went to visit Martin, and the godfather hadn't sailed on that boat yet, but Martin, maybe you can arrange that I can do that sometime. We loved the island of Hapasari. We went there to check out in order to go to Russia. And then the year after, we sailed back through here and went to the Norwegian fjords, which was a great thrill. And here's my boat, right in the fjord, 100-foot box. Makes you feel rather insignificant. We had the best time. Here's in the one of the locks in Scotland. We sailed through Scotland. And then this is down a year later in Saint-Tropez, which is, I think, the best regatta of large classic boats in the world. There's one of the replica Herreshoff schooners coming by the other side of the town. And this great sight at night when it's all lit up with the reflection off this complicated rigging. It's a fantastic sight. And then we got into a terrific Meltemi 60-knot wind when we sailed from, luckily downwind from northern Greece to the beginning of the islands, to the island of Tunis. And it got so windy we had nothing but a small jib, and we were going at very high speed down here. This is a young friend of mine I'm going to visit in Copenhagen pretty soon. He was one of the few that didn't get seasick that day, and I had him steer all day, and we went through these rough seas in the islands and got down to Tunis. And cross cruising in Greece is great. This is Santorini, where we had a very good time, and it's a beautiful spot. It's a great islands. Well, now quickly, a little bit about the America's Cup. This, of course, is the Yacht America, which I think was an exception to the knowledge of 1851, because she was a design based upon New York Harbor pilot boats, which had to be fast in order to get to the incoming ships first to have the pilot get the job. So she was really way ahead of her time. A nice sharp hollow bow, moderate displacement, good rig, and she won the race in the Isle of Wight in 1851 against 17 English boats, and that was the beginning of the America's Cup. That was the race course, 56 miles around the Isle of Wight. And here's a great cartoon of Sir Thomas Lupton, the tea merchant, who challenged 5 times, was going to do a 6th time when he was the best on, and Uncle Sam defending the America's Cup. This is my grandfather, Captain Nathaniel Green Herreshoff. He designed his first boat at the age of 10 and his last one at the age of 86, so he was in the business for 76 years. And in our model room, surrounding his portrait, we have a great many of the boats that he had for himself. This was his 96-foot steam yacht, Roma, and most of these other boats are ones that he had one time or another. And that's the way the Herreshoff company looked in the 1930s. And here is a group of yachts, most of them America's Cup boats. They had great big shears to put the rigs in. And they built these large boats in these sheds here. And this is the most fascinating of them all. This is the yacht Reliance. And you can see she epitomizes the characteristics that I've alluded to of the short keel. Her lead was more than 100 tons of lead. And the yacht itself weighed a little less than 200 tons. The ballast ratio was about 60%. She sailed with a crew of 66 sailors, 6 in the afterguard was 72, and the rig was 200 feet in the air. She was the epitome of the uncontrolled development of America's Cup boats before the advent of the universal rule to bring it down to easier practicality. This was one of the great occasions, the launching of that Reliance in April of 1903, 110 years ago. They did everything there, including making the sails, handing a new jib down from the sail loft, passed on board and go out for a trial sail. And no doubt that sail was back in the loft that evening to be fixed up a little bit, like you would do. My grandfather was a modest man who didn't say very much, but he had a great facility for names, and he called this the Noble Trio. This is the Columbia, Constitution, Reliance, and America's Cup boats all racing together in a lake with a race. We have in Rhode Island and in the United States a tradition of 25-cent pieces, quarters, each one designed for one of the 50 states of America. So we were fortunate to persuade them to make the Rhode Island quarter the Reliance. And when the United States Mint sent us a rendering of this to be checked out, I immediately realized there was a problem. The governor wanted his bridge in them. And we wanted our yacht in the picture. And the only problem is the yacht is 200 feet high and the bridge is only 160 feet high. So when I got this, I thought what I better do is tell the Mint that what they have isn't quite right. Until I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat and I said to myself, you'd be a damn fool to say that. Never say nothing, or they'd substitute some trivial little boat. So now all over the world, millions of these quarters of this great yacht sailing toward the bridge under which it could not pass. And there she is, the Reliance being pushed hard in the great sea. Now, I'm getting near the end of my time, but I do want to show you a couple of these Thomas Edison movies taken originally in 1899 of these great yachts racing. This is a very short experiment, but you'll see this is a match race start. And sorry it's a little shaky and all, but after all, they only been in movies 3 years before this. And here they are, you see, jockeying around. They seem to be very maneuverable, can attack and drive quickly. We're having a crew of 66 probably helped that. And this one is the American boat, and I'm turning towards this and across in front of us here. 1899, off of the Sandy Hook lightship outside of New York Harbor, America. Notice the steam yachts and beyond the spectator fleet, which of course is also very big at that time. I never thought I'd see movies of that. And this is another short one of the boats even closer to us, and give you a great sense of their power and speed. This was in 1902, during one of the in-between seasons when they were practicing for the future America's Cup. So here is this large yacht with a rig nearly 200 feet high coming towards us. You will see the crew on the rail, and they're going to round the mark just to the left of us, and it gives you a sense of the power of this boat coming through. Notice the big stern wave, she's moving pretty fast. And here's a competitor with a spinnaker pole. The spinnaker pole was 84 feet long. Thomas Alva Edison, 1902. Well, my experience with America's Cup was in the 12-meter yachts, for which we had a great time. I used to use a statometer to get the range to the other boat. And we had a little really computer program where we would measure the range and the bearing and quickly calculate which boat was ahead going windward. And that was a very valuable thing because we could get the rate of gain or loss. And we just were able to effectively use the basic common sense principle. If you're gaining, don't change a thing. If you're losing, change the tack or change trim or do something different. So you just abide by that, and you've got competitive boat, you've got a pretty good leg up on the other guy. Owen Stevens, who designed Rod Stevens, his brother, who used to visit Finland all the time, supervising the Swan yacht construction in northern Finland. We rented a big mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. I don't think the owner quite knew this, but we used to drive the spinnakers. Owen Stevens and his brother Rod and myself. I haven't changed a bit, of course. And we're in the foyer of that mansion. Those were great days, very competitive racing, where the match race techniques were so dominant in the 12-meter boats. I think match racing is better in boats that are not too hot, that ones are a little challenging to get them up to speed after tacking and all, and that really is the characteristic of 12 meters. We kept winning until this boat came along, Australia 2 in 1983. I was a navigator, unfortunately, on the boat that lost, as I've been a navigator on a number that have won. But this was a breakthrough boat. All of its success of Australia 2 is credited to the wing keel, but in addition to that, it was a very elegant design. It was under the international rule. The length and displacement of the boat is balanced against the sail area, and it took a long time to decide in Newport. The thing to do was to have the minimum hull and the maximum sail, and that was the case of Australia 2. She also had particularly sails, and we had a boat not quite so fast. We nearly won anyway, but we lost in the final 7th race. But I got to hold the America's Cup anyway. It's quite heavy. And this is one of my boats, S-boat, fixed wrecked, and then we fixed it up. And these are more of the Herreshoff boats. These are boats we build today called the Illyrian class, and they're very popular. We build a lot of them. And then we have a larger version, which is called Newport 29. And we produce these in Maine. Very nice woodwork, the kind of woodwork you can do here in Finland. And this is a curious thing. This is a 20-footer we recently designed, and it's sailing right in front of my late grandfather's house, where he designed his boats in this floor room. So we thought it was kind of nice to have this boat based on one of his designs, sitting right in front of his house. Nice details. We also build these pulley blocks now for the classic boats, based on the old designs. Now I want to close by showing you something maybe a little beyond what you expected, but I want to just give you a capsule of what they're doing now in San Francisco for the America's Cup with these huge catamarans. I'm not exactly in favor of what they're doing, but I'm very fascinated by it. somebody asked me the other day, would your grandfather have liked the catamarans of San Francisco? Well, I said probably he would, because as a matter of fact, he was the inventor of catamarans. In 1874, he, as a young man, 26 years old, had sailed a boat he built in Nice, France, along the Mediterranean and up the Rhone River and down the Rhine River. And in that, he learned a lot about what was going on. But I think what he saw in the Mediterranean, there used to be, according to history, outrigger boats, a little bit like the outrigger boats of the South Seas. And I think probably he saw those, and he decided a better idea was, instead of having a big hull and a little outrigger, a better idea to have two simple hulls. And therefore, he got a U.S. patent on catamarans, and he built about 20 of them as a business and race and cruising. He entered a race in New York, which was a commemoration of our United States Declaration of Independence. The race was in 1876. They didn't know who he was at that time. He wasn't well known, and they described this as a weird contraption. But he persuaded them to go in an overnight race commemorating the United States Declaration of Independence. And the only thing that went wrong for the race was that he finished that evening and the rest of them came in the next morning. So they awarded him the prize, and then the nasty thing, that evening they decided to take the prize back and give it to one of the regular boats. So that was the beginning of catamarans in America. So now I just want to show you what they're doing in San Francisco. This is a 72-foot catamaran, and you can see the windward hull is out of water, and the leeward hull has a dagger board with a hydrofoil on it, and it's also out of water. And this boat potentially will be able to go 40 knots, maybe even 45, if they don't have a disaster. I'm going to show you a disaster. Here they are on the upper hull of the tip boat. As you may know, one of the problems with catamarans is that compared to our regular boats, which is the heel attain greater and greater riding moment, in a catamaran, as you heel, the riding moment goes down, because what you're doing is shifting the center of gravity in the middle of the boat further and further to leeward, to the point where the boat will capsize. Well, now I want to show you a rather dramatic capsize. This is last fall in San Francisco on 28-knot wind, and they're just sailing in from the Golden Gate Bridge along the shore of San Francisco, and they're on a hydrofoil, but suddenly they drop off the hydrofoil and the bow goes under. And you can see the bow is going very much under, and they've got a real crisis here. So they decided to turn off to leeward, but they pitch pull head over heels in this rough wind, and the wing hits the water and it breaks. And then what happened was, and I'll show you a few stills of the same thing. This is tearing along near the northern shore of the opening to San Francisco. This is the same event as shown in the movie, and gradually tipping more and more. You see these guys hanging on here, particularly this guy over here. He's in hold of the net there and he's hanging down, and the helmsman probably is just gripping the steel, the steering wheel there, and they tip right over into the water, and the wing broke in half, and then they were swept by these strong currents out through the Golden Gate Bridge into the ocean. And because of the floundering around the big seas, the wing finally broke off and sank, and they didn't get the boat rescued back in the harbor until 10 o'clock at night. So that's sailing in America these days. Maybe a big problem. They just now gotten a new wing this last week, and they're sailing again. What I find rather humorous here is this guy just out for sailing, just sort of cruising by. Maybe he could have helped, but he didn't do so. Well, this is the Yacht America, which is a replica, and that was in San Diego after the Americans won the American Cup this last time. So with that, and a picture of one of our favorite Herreshoff boats. I want to thank you for your attention and say what a pleasure it's been to be with you here.
Halsey, thank you so very much. It was such a great presentation. I know there are tons of questions, but what I suggest we do is that as you're going to be here the whole afternoon, we'll take the questions during the break. So thank you once more.